There's a profound relationship between human rights and citizenship. Citizenship is a status, meaning you're entitled to certain kinds of rights, maybe certain kinds of protections by a state, but it's also a form of participation, like the suffragettes and like any kind of citizen who wants to participate in their political life. It allows you to assert and claim your rights, which is a very, very important aspect of something being your right. If something's your right, and especially a human right, it's not just something you should get, but it's something you can claim. You can go to your society, you can go to even other people or other societies, international organizations, and claim those rights as something they have an obligation to give you. Now, a great philosopher, a great political theorist, and a refugee from Nazi Germany, Hannah Arendt, points out that there's a bit of a problem here. She talked about the refugees provoked in the 1930s by the Nazi regime, Jewish refugees who found themselves displaced, driven from their home countries because the state not only wasn't protecting their rights, but was actively persecuting them. And when those people showed up in other countries, equipped only with their human rights, without any of the protections of citizenship, the moral response, the obligations which everybody in that society had to provide, and the society itself had an obligation to provide, just weren't forthcoming. These people had a right to shelter, to be protected, to all the basic human rights, or as she calls them, the rights of man, but they were not afforded those. So she concludes from this that what we need is not human rights or the rights of man, we need citizens' rights. We need citizenship, or at least some kind of status in that society, such that our rights are going to be observed, that we have some entitlements, right? Otherwise, when thrown back on our bare humanity, we are sort of non-persons. We just don't receive what we're due.
So when I think of a moment in history, or few moments in history that changed perspective on women's rights and migrant issues, I do have 3 moments in my mind. So the first one was the Zero Convention, so the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discriminations against women, which is a UN related document, and it was signed in 1979. So this convention, it's important for one reason, but for many also other reasons. The first one is that it compares across countries what's happening and what kind of discriminations women are subjected to in different nation states. This tool has helped countries to improve laws and policies on the issues, because comparative analysis is always crucial in doing that. So this is, I think, a first moment that changed perspective on women's rights. It actually was able to tell people, we have to focus on something which is discrimination, and they can be violence, they can be different rights issued to different people because they're coming from different women, because they're coming from different places in the world.
Ratification and the creation of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, or CEDAW as we call it, is a remarkable landmark, and is one which many states are striving to live up to. These states are reviewed by the treaty bodies surrounding the conventions, and those descriptions very often focus on vulnerable groups of women. Now, migrant women are maybe even a paradigm case of vulnerable groups of women in most countries, and that includes wealthy countries. This discourse of vulnerability, however, is itself gendered, and a lot of really interesting people, theorists have started to reflect on that. The idea that women are all vulnerable and men are never vulnerable, that is deeply problematic, and it leads to failures to promote people's rights, failures to honor people's human rights, perhaps in areas like trafficking.
Another important moment is, of course, the EU creation, so the European Union, not only because it has 2 main aims. The first one is to open up to member states so that it's easier to move inside if you are a member state, but also because it kind of make it more complicated for non-member states to enter the European Union. So it's kind of a bias, and it's also somehow it hampered network migration and women's migration.
In the 21st century, after most of the Central and Eastern European countries entered the European Union, there was a kind of hope in these countries that situation in terms of protection of human rights will look better than before, especially in Eastern European countries such as Croatia, because in Croatia we had waited for such a long time to enter the European Union because a lot of issues related to human rights because of the homeland war which happened in 1990s. But after Central and Eastern European countries entered the European Union, since there was no monitoring system from the European Union, which existed before these countries joined the European Union, we were witnessing, let's say, the stagnation of human rights and gender equality. And there is little or no progress in certain area of equality and human rights. In most of these countries, certain legislation, gender equality legislation, was adopted, but still women are facing with a lot of problems and a lot of discrimination. And since the justice system is not really well advanced, they're not reporting the cases, and general human rights law is more reluctant to take a broader perspective of discrimination of women. And most of the women actually expected that once they migrate into Western European countries, they will enjoy a better level of protection as EU citizens. But it seems to me that that level of protection is not that high as it was expected. And one of the problems which is neglected is the problem of intersectional discrimination. So intersectional discrimination is a form of discrimination which is really significant in cases of migrant women, because migrant women, when they try to access the market, they usually face double discrimination. So one is because they are women, and one because they are members of certain racial or ethnic or religious groups.
Migration itself changes gender roles, and it promotes somehow gender equality in many aspects. First of all, because women who decided to start a migration path, they are basically more aware than other people of their possibilities, their rights, but also the future reasons and the ideas that they want for themselves. So I actually think, and this may sound a little bit extreme, but I think that migration itself, it's a form of promoting gender equality worldwide, so globally. And also because most of the times women who decide to migrate, I'm talking more about legal migration in here, they're aware of the possibilities that they can have in the future, in the present, and the fact that they will be independent economically. So they are key actors of change in the country of origin, in the country of destination, and they are truly an example also for other generations to come.
In my view, current policies are not so inclusive towards different groups of migrants, especially migrant women. And from my perspective, they are blind to the problem of multiple or intersectional discrimination of migrant women. And I also hope that my research will serve as a model in terms of recommendation for national legislators on how to shape national legislation and national policies, and how to include the definition of intersectional discrimination into national law, and how to educate national judges to interpret these legal definitions in terms of giving adequate protection for migrant women in cases of intersectional discrimination.
As the Court of Justice of the European Union becomes a constitutional court, it's increasingly making human rights decisions as a court and demanding of states that they honor people's human rights as articulated under the Charter of Fundamental Rights. And there are many more aspects under the Charter of Fundamental Rights which address these problems of social and economic rights, but also some of the gendered aspects, including non-discrimination, which apply to all human beings inside Europe and including migrants. And so that really is an exciting area where the jurisprudence and the most effective jurisprudence is still now being developed. So it's a very exciting space where those people who are interested in female migrants' human rights, women's human rights, anybody's human rights, needs to look to see how we can better protect and promote people's human rights. In a European Union which is predicated on people being on the move, where the movement of labor, right, and the movement of citizens is part and parcel and essential to the European project.